Welcome to a Fans Fight Back on Pitch Boxing, where we are going to take a look at the debacle that is the heavyweight division right now. With me, Lewis Moore. Lewis, how are you?
I'm doing good, thanks, Martin. How about yourself?
Very well. Before we get started, tell people where they're going to find all your boxing works. You're a boxing photographer. You're down at York Hall this afternoon. Tell people where they can find you before we get too deep into this.
Yep, you can find me on Instagram at More Photos, MOORE, photos with 2 S's.
Nice. And you're often down at York Hall or out and about other shows now. And
Yep. If you're at a small show, well, every York Hall show is a small hall show, I guess. But if you're at York Hall for a Goodwin or Nielsen show, there's a good chance I'll be there. So, yeah.
Did I see Tom Hardy retweeting your work or tweeting out? Or
I did, yeah. Oh, it's so strange because a few weeks ago, it was Jack McGann, who's good friends with Tom Hardy, and also Stephen Graham, who Stephen Graham actually turned up. I didn't see him, but apparently he just sort of came in the court. I don't think he wanted to be noticed. Yeah, because if people see him, he's just going to get mobbed, isn't he? But I know a good photographer friend of mine, Jim Diamond, who you can also find on Instagram. I'm not quite sure where his at is, but if you look up Jim Diamond, you'll find him. And he gave some photos to Jack McGann for his fight back in October last year. And Tom Hardy put those up as well. And I always had a little bit of, when I found out I was going to do that Nielsen show with Jack McGann on him a few weeks ago, there was a little bit of, I didn't like ask for it or anything, but there was a little hope in the back of my mind that when I gave the photos to Jack, maybe I'll see that happen. But, you know, a week went by, 2 weeks went by, I just forgot about it. And then it was like, I think he put it up at like 11:50 PM or something like that. And I was just scrolling through in my bed and I saw my picture and I was like, oh, why has my picture come up? Then I saw Tom Hardy and I just sort of, picture Tom Hardy, what's going on here? And I looked up and he had posted mine and a couple of other photographers' photos, and it was just, you know, I was so chuffed. He's one of my favorite actors, as I think most British film fans. He's probably one of their favorite actors. But yeah, it was crazy.
Brilliant stuff, man. Right, let's have a look. Let's start with, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bored are you of what's gone on between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk?
1 to 10, a good 7 or 8. The fact that because there was a good like 4-day period this week gone by where, you know, Krasiuk and Klimas came out and said, oh, it's off, he's out of his training camp. Then Frank Warren came on to TalkSport and said, oh no, don't worry, we're still talking. And then Krasiuk came on to TalkSport and they spoke to one another. And then I think maybe 24, maybe 48 hours later, it was completely dead. So, you know, I've been keeping a track of it because, you know, it's the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. Even if the negotiations are as mind-numbing as they are now, it's still quite, you know, it's still something to keep a track of. But yeah, no, at this point, as bad as it is that we're not going to get it, I'm quite glad that we're going to be moving on to something else. Yeah,
I've reached a lethargy point whereby it's not that I don't care. Of course, if they signed it, I'd be all over watching it when it happened. But to play these things out in the public and in the open as they do is, I get why you do it. If something happens at the end, I get why you do it. You've built up that interest, that momentum.
Yeah.
But it's almost like they need to sign it right at the beginning and it all be done and then start building up the momentum and start building up the interest.
Yeah, and then have the dramatics afterwards. That's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, just to be a massive dry hump for like the last 2 months whereby nothing happens at the end is, in my view, quite damaging for the sport because it does draw in interest from people that aren't necessarily boxing fans. 1, because it's the undisputed heavyweight championship. 2, because it's played out quite publicly and they're big figure, or certainly Tyson is. And, you know, people at work will ask me about what's going on with it. And then by the time it all breaks down, they go, well, that's just boxing, isn't it? Like, stupid sport. Nobody ever fights each other. That's kind of the generalist's view upon it. And I can see why they think that. Like, they may not know about Benavidez versus Plant happening in America this weekend, which is a cracking fight. They do know the 2 heavyweight championship holders can't fight. And then they'll go, well, Fury never fought Joshua. Joshua never fought Wilder. Fury's not fighting Usyk. I do find it quite damaging in that the reputation of the sport gets hit every single time this kind of thing happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people kind of actually underestimated how big this fight could be commercially. Because, of course, now that there's you know, the Fury fans and the Fury haters and the Usyk fans and the Usyk haters, they're all going at each other right now. And the narrative that sort of prevailed over the last sort of, well, throughout the whole negotiations, but especially one that's going on now, that Queensberry have been pushing, is that, you know, Tyson Fury is a monumental A-side. Everyone who's going to buy a ticket is going to be there to see him. Usyk, you know, I think Frank said something along the line, I don't want to misquote him, but he said something along the lines of, they're all here for Fury. Not that many people know who Usyk is. And I think that, first of all, you know, the fact that that's only been said afterwards, and I'm sure will be easily forgotten when Frank promotes Usyk versus Dubois and probably puts it on pay-per-view. But the thing that I've always thought about this fight is that, you know, what's the number one news story in the world right now? It's Ukraine. And the fact that you would have the Ukrainian heavyweight championship of the world, the Ukrainian heavyweight champion of the world, fighting for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world against one of the biggest stars in the sport, Tyson Fury, at Wembley Stadium. You know, I don't know what BT would have forecasted in terms of pay-per-view, but I almost feel like people sort of lost a little perspective of how big this fight could have been. And like I said, the narrative that Usyk within himself isn't that big of a draw, I think is a little bit laughable, to be honest. And I'll sort of break that down in terms of numbers, if I may. So we go back to, what was it, December 2020. Joshua fights Pulev. Pulev, let's be honest, not known by any casuals in the UK. You know, a lot of people would have just seen that as Joshua versus some guy.
It's
and
the
Joshua versus
it's
some
the
guy.
Franklin fight next weekend. No one really knows who the bloke is.
Yeah, exactly. And even Franklin speaks English, so even then, you know, Pulev, I remember he was going at it in the build up, but that's neither here nor there. But I think that fight, from memory, did somewhere between 500 and 6,000 buys. Joshua's next fight after the Fury fight in Saudi Arabia fell through was the Usyk fight at Tottenham, which not only sold out just under 70,000 tickets literally instantly, and also did a massive amount of pay-per-view by somewhere around 700,000, 800,000. So there you can see Usyk brings in a little bit more value himself. But then you fast forward to last August, when they had the rematch, which did in the region of about 1.1, 1.2. So we see that Joshua versus, and again, people say, oh, well, of course it did big numbers. Joshua's there. People aren't buying Usyk. People buying Joshua. Largely true. But like I said, when you break it down in terms of Joshua versus a no one does about 500, 600,000. But then he fights Usyk and it does almost double. Or maybe actually exactly double. So the fact that Usyk is this no name, and he doesn't speak English, and no one's gonna, no one in the UK cares about him. They're all there to see Fury. It's the Fury party, and Usyk's just along for the ride. A big fact about boxing, when again these narratives about, oh, they're only here to see one fighter. People don't pay to see boxers. They pay to see fights. They pay to see one person fight another person. And like I said, I think people really underestimated how big this fight could have been commercially. And I think that, like I said, you've got the Ukrainian heavyweight champion of the world versus the English heavyweight champion of the world. And I think it really could have caught a light, but, maybe we'll get it at the end of the year. But like you said, it's mind-numbing to think about at this point.
And also, you can rewind it back a little further than that to the Bellew fight against Usyk, and I think that did 500,000-600,000. Hearn said, which
take
that have a pinch of salt, but it's a reasonable enough number for Bellew, who's never been that household name that Joshua is. He's a good.
He was coming off the David Haye fights, and I think one, if not both, of the David Haye fights are in the top 10 most selling British pay-per-views of all time. So I think that that 500,000 odd number for Usyk's pay-per-view debut on UK soil isn't really far-fetched at all.
Yeah, and I think the Warren part that you were kind of quoting there, he was, again, not verbatim, but it was something along the lines of people only know Usyk as that guy that beat Joshua, which is almost to imply that like, I don't get that. People will know him as the guy that beat Joshua, and by osmosis, that makes him a pretty big star in the UK.
Exactly,
Joshua is, and that makes Usyk a big name. But the whole thing around percentage splits, rematches, what the percentage splits of the rematches would be, if you boil it all down into where would you lay the blame? Where would you lay the blame? Is it all on one side, all on another, kind of somewhere in the middle?
I think that I remember the last time I was on Fans Fight Back, it was the Derek Shaw and Tyson Fury fight week. And I remember you asked me about my opinion. I said, you know what, I could trash it, but everyone's already done that, as awful as a matchup, and it deserved it. But I said one of the things that made it a little bit more palatable to me was that I genuinely thought that it made the Usyk fight very likely. Now, I was very wrong on that, but I'll tell you who else was quite wrong on that, and that was Queensbury. I remember Frank Warren saying after the Chisora fight, we might have an announcement for Fury Usyk by the end of this year. And it was, I remember they told Joshua, oh, the reason we're giving you all these deadlines is because we need to fight you on December 3rd, no later, because we've got Usyk in February. So the February date comes and goes, late February date comes and goes, early March comes and goes. All of a sudden, as Bob Arum, Tyson Fury's promoter, confirmed, Usyk had done his deal with the Saudis. I think literally this time last year when they were he did it at the same time that they were doing the Joshua rematch. And, it's all of these, and Fury was the one who hadn't been able to secure his deal. So all of these dates get pushed back and back and back. And then, I mentioned earlier about how they were going at it on TalkSport, and Frank Warren said something that's 100% true. He said to not Klimas, Alex Krassyuk, he said, we're not going to be negotiating this over the phone. 100%. But then can you answer me a question? Why is Tyson Fury negotiating this fight over Instagram? Because as far as I can tell, and I think this is the same case as what happened last year with the Joshua fight negotiations, where Fury came out and said, oh, hey, Joshua, bum Dosso, you've got 3 days to sign the contract, mush, yada, yada, yada. And then that deadline just comes and goes. And I remember, I think it was George Warren went on to TalkSport and said, oh, no, we're not working with that deadline. That's not, Tyson Fury's just doing his own thing. Lo and behold, the deadline passes and goes, and, Tyson Fury didn't pull out. And then there was another deadline the week after, but that's neither here nor there. But it seems as though Tyson Fury will just be in his training camp. He'll be, although I'm not quite sure if he was in his training camp because Sugar Hill Stewart hasn't been here until last week. But again, that's neither here nor there. But Tyson Fury will just sort of be walking around his house in Morecambe, and he'll go, you know what, 70-30. And he goes out onto Instagram 7 weeks or maybe 8 weeks from fight night and says, Usyk, Gappy Teeth, Rabbit, blah, 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 70-30, accept it or take it or leave it. And Frank Warren didn't confirm this outright, but I would really like someone to directly ask him the question. Was the 70-30 split communicated with Team Usyk before Fury went onto Instagram? Because like he said, you can't do this over TalkSport. You certainly can't do it over Instagram stories. And then he a few days later, after Usyk, I remember that the tweet got like 50,000 or just under 50,000 likes or something when he accepted that split. And then it was like the next week, Fury comes out and says, oh, you know what? We're going to take out the rematch clause. And then Frank Warren himself is on TalkSport a couple of days later and says, yeah, no, we were thinking of doing a rematch clause, but, now Tyson wants to say, and it just seems as though there's that lack of communication between Warren and Queensbury. But what I will say is this. I do not believe for a second that Fury didn't want this fight. I don't think that Usyk didn't want this fight. I know we're seeing a lot of headlines now of Usyk has pulled out. Yeah, he pulled out, but there's a lot of very justifiable reasons as to why a fighter would pull out. They're not just going to stay in endless negotiations until they call the other one's bluff and have them pulled out, especially since Usyk would be the B-side in this case. But yeah, it's a whole conundrum. And I think that, like I said, I'm glad that it's over now because it was just going on for far too long.
There are two things to pick up out of some of that, which are all really valid points. The first being, go back to Fury Chisora, October last year, I think.
The fight was December 3rd, but I think they signed it in October, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the outcome of that fight the moment the ink's dried on the contract. Nobody is up for debate on that. So, you've then got that fight date in December. So let's go with December. You literally had Usyk up on the ring apron taking a selfie with Tyson Fury. You've got both teams in London in December. Why do negotiations not start the day after that Wembley fight? Fury's like, I fail to believe Fury is the one that sits around a negotiation table. He's got promoters, he's got advisors.
Same with Usyk.
We'll use the word advisors because I'm not sure what else I can get away with on here. But, there's teams. Same with Usyk. He's got Klimas. He's got everybody around him. Why did negotiations not just start the day after? Because
That's interesting because I think they actually started it around the time that they signed the Chisora fight. Because you remember they tried to get there was that big grand Saudi deal where Joshua was going to step aside for his rematch with Usyk and Dillian White was going to step aside from his mandatory with Fury. And they tried to get that big Saudi deal for March of last year, like I mentioned earlier. And I think that those Usyk negotiations for that early February date, which, we're what, like 6 weeks away from it. I was so happy that we watched the Undisputed Heavyweight Championship of the World. But it's now, I think they started the negotiations well before they actually got in the ring with Chisora. And like I said, that's the thing, is like we had this one date and then that date fell through. And then all of a sudden the Saudis can't build their stadium, even though they've been negotiating that date for the last, 4 or 5 months.
Why
the whole thing is
building stadiums? Just leave them up. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they wanted to build a purpose-built one for some reason. I don't know. But like I said, I really don't think that either fighter is ducked either fighter. I think that both of them wanted to make the fight, but I do believe that, of course, negotiations have failed. And the reasoning for that, in my opinion, is because, like I said, I think that Fury goes out on Instagram and says 70-30. He says, take out the rematch clause, even though they were the ones that wanted the rematch clause, as Frank Warren confirmed. Back in the Joshua negotiations, deadline. And I think that, there's some kind of lack of communication there. But who knows? Maybe I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt.
The other point to pick up from what you were saying was, I fully believe Tyson Fury would happily fight Alexander Usyk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always my frustration with these things is that if you just said, right, Tyson, Alexander, sit in this room, we're going to lock the door, there's a budget of $50 million, and we'll let you out once you've discussed who's going to take what amount of that. 100% they would unlock that door within half an hour. Like if you just left the two of them and they'd come to an agreement, and that might be Tyson takes 35, Usyk takes 15. It's everybody else in the sport that makes these things so complicated and stops them happening. I don't blame the fighters necessarily. I say if you just left two men in a room to sort it out, I think they'd be realistic enough. And of course they want to fight each other, but this is where it comes.
It's something that I've thought, and I don't know if this has ever been done, and I'd like to speak to a promoter if this case has ever been done. But, Frank Warren and Team Usyk have both said February 29th was done. The reason why this didn't happen is because of the rematch split. I would really like to know whether it was discussed, whether it was even an option, and whether Frank Warren has ever done this in the past, where you say, you know what, how about we do the fight, we agree to have a rematch 100%, but we don't decide the rematch split until after the first fight. Because it's a pay-per-view. It could do Fury Usyk could do 0 buys. It could do 2 million. It could, I think the current record is Joshua Ruiz 2, which done 1.6. You don't know how big that split how big each part of the split that you're arguing about for the rematch is until you've actually had the first one. So I would really like to ask someone, why can't you just have it in writing? We agree a rematch. However, we will agree the split after April 29th. And again, the fact that we would, like I said, April 29th was done. All of the terms of that specific date were good up until a few days ago. It's just such a massive shame. And like I say, I think it really does turn a lot of people off the sport.
It does. And, at the same time, you've got people complaining about, YouTubers coming into the sport. The boxing shoots itself in the foot. Go back to that December fight. You've got Usyk, you've got Joyce, you've got Fury, all there getting the headlines straight after the fight. Those were the things that appeared on Sky Sports. Those were the things that appeared on BBC Sport. Those, like the actual Chisora outcome, nobody really cared about. They cared about the furore that was kind of built up afterwards with the three of them.
It was a tune-up for the Usyk fight, or I guess now the Joyce fight.
Yeah, and they were shouting at each other and they were blah, 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 blah. It built all that momentum there and then. And then, 3 months later, it's all fallen apart. That's where the sport goes wrong. How do we solve it? Like, if you could take a silver bullet to it that solves everything, my view is, and I'm frankly shocked nobody in boxing has ever done this, and I tweeted something about it the other day, that given that the sport will sell its soul for a $5, I'm amazed nobody has ever done this, right? If I'm a sanctioning body, if you want to fight for a world title, fine. Like, if you're the world title holder, cool. If you're challenging for a world title, cool. every single world title fight, the negotiations have to be live streamed. And you get a 2-hour window to go in, and in that 2-hour window, you've got to decide percentage split / purse, whatever it may be. You've got to decide venue, date. Cool. Like, you've got to come out of it. And if you can't do it in those 2 hours, bin it. Move on to the next one. Somebody else can have the opportunity.
Yeah, because that reminds me of something I remember Rob Tebbett saying that really stuck with me, is that what you often hear in boxing nowadays is, oh, well, we either do the fight on pay-per-view or we don't do it at all. And Rob Tebbett said, well, how about you just don't do the fight? And I was like, yeah, that's absolutely true. Because if you take the idea of, oh, let's just do it on pay-per-view every single time, as we've seen in recent years, everything goes on pay-per-view. In the UK, I remember we had Parker Chisora 1 on pay-per-view. In the US, you had Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios. Either of those fights, if you told me that they weren't going to happen, cool. I can live without Thurman Barrios. I can live without Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz, although that one was actually quite entertaining from what I remember. But at the same time, if it's the business logistics that's going to get in the way, which is the case 99% of the time, like we've said, it's very rare that a fighter is ducking another fighter outright. And I hate to use that word. I can't remember the last time I used it. But since it's the business logistics all the time, something that I think that they should do publicly, and I think one of the governing bodies, sanctioning bodies even, one of them do, I can't remember which one, but for the very least, live stream the purse bids. Purse bids get a lot of buzz. You remember the Fury White purse bids? That was a whole debacle for weeks. And then Frank Warren came in. I think it was the biggest purse bid win of all time. Matchroom did it as well. I think one or two others. And, purse bids at the very least, I think are something that, it's an open bid. And I think that some kind of homes under the hammer auction, boxing wise, would be a very good idea. And I think a lot of people would watch it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think somebody had, when I tweeted something about this the other day, somebody had said, well, what about the privacy of the fighters and the commercial privacy? You literally have purse bids. Purse bids tell you the exact amount of money that's going to go into the pot and the exact split. So you know precisely what they're going to be. So boxers are used to this already. So you can't use that as a reason not to do it. Then somebody had said about, it's you can't legally film contracts and signings and negotiations or something. Right, okay, but Eddie Hearn is willing to fly a man who's failed 2 drugs tests to somewhere, we haven't really worked out where yet, somewhere where they'll let a man fight even though he's failed 2 drugs tests. You're telling me that the lot based out in Panama can't find somewhere that will let you film a contract negotiation? Nah, no chance. Someone somewhere will allow you to do it for a certain amount of money. But as boxing fans, almost 90% of what we talk about is what happens outside of the ring, not what happens inside of the ring, because it's so infrequent and so poor standard the majority of the time. It's actually the gossip columns that fill up the majority of the conversations. So why doesn't somebody...
Look at Coley versus Light. What's everyone been talking about?
Oh, yeah.
We've got what, 4, maybe 5 British male world champions at the moment. One of them's making his his debut on Sky, and he's coming back after a year's worth of inactivity. He's quite popular. He's got a big Instagram following. He's got his rap career. He's quite popular outside of boxing. But all anyone's talking about is well, we know what it is. Let's be honest.
Yes, yeah. Interesting story. I was doing an interview with Coley a couple of weeks back. And I won't name names, but during the interview, I had asked him, I'd only mentioned Matchroom twice during the interview, which I thought was quite lenient given the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
And on the second time I've mentioned it, somebody that was there turned the screen around and said, don't mention Matchroom anymore. Like halfway through a question. So I ended up binning the interview off. Because anyway,
next time you have him on, ask him what other Tarantino films he's a fan of.
Okay, but Lawrence was lovely, absolutely lovely. I said this thing happened, which was about 3 weeks ago, which was quite interesting. I only mentioned that because all that we've seen this week, as Eddie has pointed out, is that Matchroom and Hearn are the only thing that they're using to kind of use as a vehicle to sell this fight is that conversation. So something has changed.
I always feel sorry for promoters because whenever Eddie Hearn talks about Wilder, all of the Wilder fans say, oh, he's just using Wilder's name in AJ Fight Week to prop up Joshua's name, even though the exact same thing is true the other way around. But at the end of the day, Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom, well, we know what Ben Shalom does when he doesn't want to be asked a certain question before the interview. But at the end of the day, these promoters get asked questions, and no commenting it can often be very, very damaging. So if Eddie Hearn is asked about Wilder, or if Wilder is asked about Joshua in his fight week, or if Ben Shalom is asked about Eddie Hearn, it's one of those things. It's like, it's going to do views, and you get to vent some of your own personal frustration. So it's annoying that it happens, but unfortunately you can see why it makes sense.
Yeah. And to round it off then, with both Fury and Usyk, what do you think their next fights will be, and roughly when?
I think I hope that they don't cancel Joyce versus Zhang, because I've got tickets to go, and that's I think if it was like maybe a couple months away, they probably would cancel it, but I think it's 3 weeks today. So I think what they'll do is they'll probably go ahead with that. And Mike Coppinger was on the Max Kellerman show on ESPN yesterday, and he said that I think it's something along the lines of there are already some discussions to have Fury versus Joyce in the summer. Fantastic, no problem with that whatsoever. Fury versus Joyce at Wembley Stadium. Take my money. I can't imagine Joyce is going to be a diva in negotiations. He never has been, and I think he would be quiet. I'm not going to say he's going to be easy. I mean, I don't know the guy, but I can't imagine he's going to be difficult in these negotiations. So I could really see that happening, provided he gets past Zhang, which I don't think is a certain bet. But in terms of Usyk, I think right now he's probably in a bit of a limbo. I think the Dubois fight makes a lot of sense, because as much as Warren and Team Usyk have fallen out, I don't think they're at each other's throats. I think they're going to take a few days to sort of cool off, and then I think they're probably going to start some initial conversations for the Dubois fight. Dubois says he's 100% up for taking it. Frank has not said anything different. So yeah, I think Usyk versus Dubois at the O2. I'm not too pissed off for that, if I'm going to be completely honest. And Fury Joyce, I think, would be a great fight. Again, they're all very, very, very subpar plan Bs towards instead of what we should have got. But Usyk Dubois and Fury Joyce, maybe we're going to get Dubois versus Joyce too for the Undisputed Championship.
Yeah. I'm vetoing whatever happens next.
Oh, okay.
they can both.
You're on the other side of things.
They can both get in the bin at this point. If you can't make it happen, then why should we as fans invest in time, energy, money, care as to what happens? What I do think will happen is I reckon you'll see Usyk Wilder. I reckon that'll end up out in Saudi Arabia somewhere. If I'm anywhere near Daniel Dubois, if I'm Shane McGuigan, if I'm Frank Warren, if I'm whoever manages in,
I know what you're going to say.
I would swerve that. I would injure my hand tomorrow and not go anywhere near that fight. I would take a hammer to my own right hand if needed, just to make sure I didn't have to take that fight. Stupid fight, in my view.
Maybe he's going to catch him. He's going to catch him and knock him out. You never know. He's such a big puncher.
Yeah, that's bonkers. To me, that is the prime example of what a cash out would be if you put Dubois into that fight. He's he's nowhere near ready for it.
His last fight against Kevin Lerena was literally let's put you against the smaller southpaw to see what you'll be like against a smaller southpaw. And it's like, I just wonder. It's like with Anthony Yard. It's like, we could catch him. Let's just throw him in. He's a big puncher. I think if he hits Beterbiev, I think if he hits Kovalev, he's going to knock him out. Yeah, we say that a lot, and it doesn't really happen.
Yeah, if is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in that sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I genuinely hope we don't see Usyk Dubois. As much, you always have an interest in a Brit fighting for a world heavyweight title. I don't have any interest in that whatsoever. It's not saying 5 years' time I wouldn't, but Dubois is not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
There's a whole group of heavyweights coming through, of which Dubois is kind of their peers. He's not Usyk's. Usyk needs to be fighting Wilder, needs to be fighting Fury, needs to be fighting maybe Joyce. They came through from the amateurs. I do not want to see Dubois. As for Fury, I'd love to see the Joyce fight, but out of principle, I'm vetoing whatever Fury does next until he does something relevant. Yeah. Right. There we go. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy your York Hall this afternoon. Enjoy people. Go and catch Lewis's photos. Check out Tom Hardy's Instagram if you want to see all of them. They're all on there probably. But yeah.
I can now say, as featured on Tom Hardy's Instagram, I never really thought I'd be able to say that. So I was quite happy about that.
Excellent stuff. Lewis, thank you so much, mate.
No worries. Thank you very much, Martin. Have a good one.